I sat in the suffocating silence of the lawyer's office, watching my sister inspect her manicured nails, while the man across the desk declared me virtually penniless. She smirked, leaned over, and whispered, "Stay broke, sis." But she didn't know about the locked brass box sitting in my trunk. My grandfather, Theodore Carmichael, was a titan of a man. He didn't just build Carmichael hardware from a single dusty storefront into a regional empire. He built our family. After my father, Richard, passed away when I was barely 10 years old, Grandpa Teddy stepped in to fill the void. He was the anchor in my life, the man who taught me how to change a tire, balance a checkbook, and understand the value of a hard-earned dollar. My older sister, Victoria, learned entirely different lessons from our childhood. While I was out in the garage with Grandpa, getting motor oil on my jeans, Victoria was inside with our mother, Eleanor, learning how to leverage her striking looks and sharp tongue to get whatever she wanted. Victoria was the golden child, pampered, pristine, and perpetually dissatisfied. She viewed Grandpa Teddy not as a beloved family patriarch, but as a walking trust fund. For the last 3 years of Grandpa's life, his mind began to betray him. The dementia crept in like a slow fog, stealing his sharp wit and replacing it with agonizing periods of confusion. That was when Victoria, who hadn't visited him for Sunday dinner in half a decade, suddenly decided to play the role of the devoted, doting granddaughter. She practically moved into his sprawling stone estate on the outskirts of Boston. She took over his medical care, managed his schedule, and, most devastatingly, began to isolate him. Whenever I tried to visit, Victoria would block the door. "He's having a bad day, Chloe," she would say, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "The doctor said too much stimulation makes him agitated. You don't want to upset him, do you?" I was naive enough to believe her, or perhaps just too exhausted from working double shifts at the hospital to fight her on it. I trusted that my sister, despite her flaws, wouldn't cross certain lines. I was devastatingly wrong. When Grandpa Teddy passed away on a rainy Tuesday in October, the grief nearly swallowed me whole. At the funeral, Victoria wore a custom-tailored black designer dress, weeping beautifully into a lace handkerchief, while her fiancé, Bradley, held her up for the benefit of the wealthy onlookers. I stood in the back, wearing an off-the-rack suit, quietly breaking apart. 2 weeks later, we were summoned to the downtown offices of Alistair Finch, Grandpa's longtime corporate attorney. The mahogany-paneled room smelled of old paper and expensive cologne. I sat on the edge of a leather wingback chair, my hands folded in my lap, dreading the finality of this moment. Victoria burst through the heavy double doors 15 minutes late, dangling the keys to a brand-new Porsche. Bradley trailed behind her, looking like a smug bodyguard in a $1,000 suit. "Let's make this quick, Alistair," Victoria sighed, dropping her designer bag onto the pristine conference table. "The caterers for the estate renovation are meeting me at 2. Mr. Finch adjusted his glasses, looking visibly uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and opened the thick ivory folder on his desk. "Very well. We are here to read the last will and testament of Theodore James Carmichael, updated and finalized exactly 4 months ago." My head snapped up. 4 months ago? Grandpa had been completely non-lucid 4 months ago. He barely knew what year it was, let alone possess the mental capacity to restructure his estate. Finch began to read the dense legal jargon, but the translation was brutally simple. The Carmichael estate, the stock portfolios, the commercial real estate holdings, and 90% of the liquid assets were being left to Victoria. "And to my younger granddaughter, Chloe Carmichael," Finch read, his voice dropping an octave, his eyes refusing to meet mine. "I leave the sum of $10,000. It is my firm belief that Chloe lacks the financial maturity and ambition to manage a larger portion of this estate, and I hope this nominal sum will teach her the value of self-reliance." The room started to spin. My lungs felt tight, deprived of oxygen. Financial maturity? I had paid my own way through nursing school, while Victoria had maxed out 3 of Grandpa's credit cards on a single trip to Milan. Those weren't Grandpa's words. They were Victoria's venom, copied and pasted into a legal document. Victoria let out a soft, mocking laugh. She leaned across the polished wood table, her eyes glittering with malicious triumph. "Well, Chloe, I guess he finally saw you for what you really are, a dead weight. But don't worry, if you ever need a loan to pay your little apartment rent, You know who to call." "He didn't write this," I whispered, my voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of grief and rage. I looked at the lawyer. "Mr. Finch, you know my grandfather. You know his mind was gone 4 months ago. He didn't write this." "The document was signed and notarized, Chloe," Finch said quietly, packing away the papers. He looked defeated. "There were 2 witnesses. Legally, it is ironclad." "Stay broke, sis," Victoria sneered, standing up and looping her arm through Bradley's. "You always were the loser of the family. Time to face reality." They swept out of the office, leaving me sitting alone in the heavy silence. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully erased my grandfather's true legacy and discarded me in the process. But as the shock began to wear off, a cold, hard determination took its place. Victoria had gotten greedy, and in her arrogance, she had underestimated me. The weeks following the will reading were a nightmare of financial and emotional strain. The $10,000 barely covered the debts I had accrued, paying for my mother's unexpected medical bills the year prior. A burden Victoria had completely refused to help with. I was dodging calls from my landlord, working overtime until my feet bled, and surviving on cheap coffee and spite. Meanwhile, Victoria's social media feeds transformed into a nauseating reality show of instant wealth. There were photos of Bradley popping champagne on a chartered yacht, videos of Victoria tearing down the historic interior of the Carmichael estate to replace it with cold, modern marble, and endless unboxing videos of luxury watches. She was systematically erasing every trace of Theodore Carmichael from the face of the earth. I couldn't let it happen without a fight. I needed a piece of him, something to hold on to before she destroyed it all. On a dreary Saturday morning, I drove my beat-up sedan to the estate. As I pulled up the long gravel driveway, my stomach plummeted. Sitting on the front lawn was a massive industrial dumpster. Surrounding it were careless piles of Grandpa's life, his vintage leather armchairs, his framed war medals, stacks of his favorite leather-bound books. I scrambled out of the car, sprinting toward the debris. I was pulling a beautiful 19th century mahogany humidor from the trash when the heavy oak front door swung open. "What do you think you're doing?" Victoria snapped, stepping out onto the porch in a cashmere sweater, holding a mug of coffee. Bradley was right behind her, chewing gum and looking bored. "You're throwing away his medals, Victoria," I screamed, my voice cracking as I held up a tarnished silver star. "These belong in a shadow box, not a landfill. Have you completely lost your soul?" "They don't match the new aesthetic," she said coldly, taking a sip of her coffee. "Put it down, Chloe. That's my property. You're trespassing. You manipulated a dying man." I took a step toward her, the grief boiling over into pure fury. "You isolated him, you poisoned his mind, and you forced him to sign that piece of paper. You stole this." Bradley chuckled, a low, grating sound. "You sound unhinged, Chloe. Maybe we should call the cops. Have the broke sister hauled off for trespassing." Victoria smirked, stepping down to the bottom of the porch stairs. She lowered her voice so only I could hear. "Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic little nurse. I earned this. I sat in this suffocating house for 3 years. I listened to his drooling, mindless babbling. I made sure he took his pills, and I made sure his hand was steady enough to sign exactly where I told him to. Now get off my property before I ruin what's left of your miserable life." She turned on her heel and walked back inside, the heavy door slamming shut behind her. I stood in the freezing drizzle, clutching the silver star to my chest. I made sure his hand was steady enough. She had practically confessed. I loaded whatever I could salvage into the trunk of my car, my mind racing. I needed proof. I needed a witness. And suddenly, I knew exactly who to find. Martha Higgins had been Grandpa's live-in housekeeper for 25 years. She was the one who baked me cookies when I scraped my knee, the one who knew Grandpa's routines better than anyone. 6 months before Grandpa died, Victoria abruptly fired her, claiming Martha was stealing silverware. It was an obvious lie to get rid of the only person who could see what Victoria was really doing. It took me 3 days to track Martha down to a tiny, run-down apartment complex in South Boston. We met at a local diner on a Tuesday evening. The rain was lashing against the diner windows, casting long, weeping shadows across the cracked vinyl booth. When Martha slid into the seat across from me, she looked 10 years older. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around a mug of black coffee. "Oh, Chloe," she whispered, tears immediately welling in her kind, tired eyes. I am so sorry. I should have called you. I should have fought harder. Martha, I need to know the truth, I said, leaning over the table, keeping my voice low. What was going on in that house before Victoria fired you? Martha swallowed hard, a tear slipping down her wrinkled cheek. It was a nightmare, honey. Victoria would hide his heart medication if he didn't cooperate with her. She would tell him that you moved away, that you hated him and didn't want to see him anymore. It broke his heart. He cried for you, Chloe. But worst of all, she brought these sleazy lawyers into the house late at night. They would shout at him, confuse him, force pens into his hand. My blood ran cold. Can you testify to this? If I challenge the will in court, will you swear to it? Martha looked down at her coffee, shaking her head slowly. Chloe, your sister threatened me. Bradley said if I ever spoke up, they'd frame my grandson for drug possession. He's a good boy. He just started college. I can't risk it. But... She paused, looking around the diner nervously before pulling a small folded piece of paper from her purse. But what? I urged. About a month before he passed, your grandfather had a good day, Martha whispered. A really good day. The fog just lifted. Victoria and Bradley were in New York for the weekend, blowing his money. He remembered everything. He realized what she had been making him sign. My heart hammered against my ribs. What did he do? He called an old friend, Martha said, sliding the paper across the table. A retired attorney named Wallace Caldwell. They were on the phone for hours. The next day, Mr. Caldwell came to the house while Victoria was still gone. They drafted something new. A second document. I was the witness. I stared at the paper in front of me. It was a phone number and an address. Grandpa knew Victoria would tear the house apart looking for it if she suspected anything, Martha continued, her eyes locking onto mine with fierce urgency. He hid it, Chloe. He hid it in the one place Victoria would never, ever set foot because she thought it was beneath her. The dusty workshop, I breathed, realizing the horrifying truth. Victoria's demolition crew was scheduled to bulldoze the old garage workshop at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. If I didn't get in there tonight, the true will would be buried under a ton of rubble forever. I stood in the freezing rain, clutching a rusty crowbar, about to break into my own grandfather's estate. My sister had stolen my inheritance, erased his legacy, and publicly called me broke. But she didn't know Grandpa had one last secret, and I had exactly 6 hours to find it. The clock on my dashboard glared an angry red. 1:14 a.m. The demolition crew was scheduled to arrive at dawn. I parked my sedan 2 blocks away from the Carmichael estate, pulling up the hood of my dark raincoat. The October chill bit through my thin sweater, but the adrenaline rushing through my veins kept me moving. I slipped through the wrought iron side gates, navigating the perimeter of the property by memory. The sprawling grounds were pitched in absolute darkness, save for the motion sensor security lights Victoria had installed near the main house. The old garage workshop sat at the far end of the property, tucked behind a line of overgrown oak trees. It was a modest wooden structure, weathered and sagging, the complete antithesis of the opulent mansion. To Victoria, it was an eyesore. To me, it was holy ground. As I approached the structure, a yellow bulldozer was already parked ominously just 20 feet away, its massive metal bucket resting on the wet grass like a sleeping predator. The heavy sliding barn doors were padlocked. Victoria had brought in heavy-duty chains. I gripped the crowbar I'd brought from my trunk, wedged the flat edge behind the padlock's mounting bracket, and threw my entire body weight into it. Wood splintered with a sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. I froze, holding my breath, waiting for a security alarm to blare or a guard to shout. Nothing but the sound of the falling rain. I pulled the chain loose and slipped inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. I clicked on a small tactical flashlight. The beam cut through decades of dust. The smell hit me instantly, a mixture of sawdust, motor oil, and Grandpa Teddy's distinct cedar cologne. The walls were lined with pegboards holding rusted tools. His old, heavy-duty workbench dominated the center of the room. It was exactly as he had left it years ago, untouched by Victoria's manic renovation spree. He hid it in the one place Victoria would never set foot, Martha had told me. But where? The workshop was packed with crates, old car parts, and stacks of lumber. I started tearing through the room. I opened rusty filing cabinets, dug through boxes of old invoices, and checked behind the pegboards. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. Panic began to claw at my throat. If I didn't find it, Martha's testimony wouldn't be enough. Victoria's high-priced lawyers would bury us in court. I stood in front of the workbench, wiping a mixture of sweat and rain from my forehead. I closed my eyes, trying to channel him. Where would you put it, Grandpa? What was our secret? Suddenly, a memory flashed in my mind. I was 12 years old, sitting on a stool while Grandpa fixed a lawnmower engine. He had told me, Chloe, a good carpenter never leaves his best work visible to the naked eye. The real craftsmanship is in the foundation, underneath the surface. I dropped to my knees. The workbench was bolted to the floor, built from massive planks of solid oak. I crawled underneath it, shining my flashlight upward at the underside of the heavy tabletop. There, nestled between the thick wooden crossbeams, was a false bottom. It was secured by 4 flathead screws, completely invisible unless you were lying flat on your back on the oily concrete floor. My hands shaking, I grabbed a flathead screwdriver from the top of the bench and went to work. The screws were tight, rusted from the damp air, but I forced them loose, my knuckles scraping against the rough wood. When the final screw dropped, a rectangular wooden panel swung down on a concealed hinge. Inside the hidden compartment was a heavy antique brass box. It was secured with a small combination lock. I didn't need to guess the code. It was my birthday. I pulled the box free, clutching it to my chest, overwhelmed by a sudden, violent wave of emotion. I had it. Suddenly, the sweeping beam of a security flashlight cut through the cracks in the barn siding. "Hey! Someone's in the old garage!" A gruff voice shouted from the driveway. Heavy boots pounded against the gravel. I didn't think. I just reacted. I shoved the brass box into my waterproof backpack, scrambled to the back of the workshop, and threw my shoulder against the old ventilation window. The latch broke, and I tumbled out head first into the mud just as the front doors were violently thrown open. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted into the tree line, branches whipping against my face as I ran blindly into the night. By the time I reached my car, I was gasping for air, covered in mud and grease, but I was smiling. At 9 a.m. the next morning, I sat in the modest, book-lined office of Wallace Caldwell, the retired attorney Martha had directed me to. He was a sharp-eyed man in his late 70s, radiating quiet integrity. I set the brass box on his desk and input the combination. The lock clicked open. Inside was a single manila envelope. Wallace carefully opened it and extracted the documents. As he read over the pages, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across his weathered face. "Your grandfather was a brilliant man, Chloe," Wallace said softly. He knew exactly what Victoria was doing. This document was drafted by me, signed by him, and witnessed by Martha and a notary public I personally provided. It includes a medical evaluation from an independent neurologist stating he was experiencing a period of complete lucidity, fully capable of making legal decisions. Wallace pulled out a smaller, handwritten letter and handed it to me. "He also left this for you." I unfolded the thick stationery. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were unmistakably his. "My dearest Chloe, if you are reading this, I am gone, and Victoria has likely shown her true colors. For months, I was lost in the fog, letting her control me, but on my clear days, I saw the darkness in her heart. She does not love this family. She only loves its wealth. I am leaving you everything because I know you will protect it. Do not let her win. Fight for our name. I love you, my brave girl. Grandpa Teddy." Tears blurred my vision as I traced his signature. I looked up at Wallace, my sorrow hardening into pure, unyielding resolve. "So," I said, wiping my eyes, "how do we take her down?" Victoria couldn't just renovate the estate. She had to turn it into a spectacle. 2 days later, she hosted a lavish demolition brunch on the sprawling back lawn. She had invited 50 of Boston's young elite, local socialites, and real estate developers to sip mimosas and watch the symbolic destruction of the old carriage house before the main renovations began. She stood on a raised patio, wearing a stunning white pantsuit, holding a crystal champagne flute. Bradley stood beside her, looking incredibly pleased with himself. A catering crew moved silently among the guests, offering salmon, blinnis, and caviar. It was a vulgar display of stolen wealth. I walked through the open iron gates, wearing the same modest off-the-rack suit I wore to Grandpa's funeral. Flanking me on my right was Wallace Caldwell, clutching a leather briefcase. On my left was two uniformed sheriff's deputies, holding a court injunction. The chatter of the crowd died down as we marched up the manicured lawn. People stared, whispering behind their champagne flutes. Victoria's smile vanished the second she saw me. Her eyes narrowed into furious slits. "What is the meaning of this?" Victoria demanded, stepping to the edge of the patio. "Chloe, I told you you were banned from this property. And who the hell are these people? Bradley, call security." Bradley stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "You need to leave, Chloe. Right now. You're embarrassing yourself." "The only one about to be embarrassed is you, Bradley," I said, my voice projecting across the silent lawn. I stopped at the base of the patio steps, looking directly into my sister's panicked eyes. "I brought some friends, Victoria. We thought it was time to read Grandpa's actual will." Victoria let out a sharp, forced laugh, though her hands were visibly trembling. "You're delusional. Alistair Finch read the will. It's settled. You get your little $10,000, and I get the estate. You're just a bitter, broke loser who can't accept reality." Wallace Caldwell stepped forward, unlatching his briefcase. He pulled out the crisp documents we had retrieved from the brass box. "Actually, Miss Carmichael, the will Mr. Finch read was dated June 14th. The document I hold in my hand was executed on September 2nd, completely revoking all previous testaments. I am Wallace Caldwell, Theodore Carmichael's personal attorney." Victoria's face drained of all color. She looked like a ghost. "That's a lie. He was a vegetable in September. He couldn't even hold a pen." "Not true," Wallace corrected, his voice booming with authority. "Attached to this will is an independent psychological evaluation proving his lucidity on the day of signing. Furthermore, we have a sworn affidavit from Martha Higgins, detailing the emotional abuse, isolation, and coercion you subjected your grandfather to in order to procure that fraudulent June document." The guests began to murmur loudly. Several people backed away from the patio, distancing themselves from Victoria. "Let's get to the terms, shall we?" Wallace continued, adjusting his reading glasses. To quote Theodore Carmichael directly, "Due to the appalling greed and elder abuse demonstrated by my granddaughter Victoria, I hereby revoke all her claims to my estate. I leave her the sum of $1, so she cannot claim she was forgotten, but rather explicitly judged and found wanting." Someone in the crowd actually gasped. Victoria dropped her champagne flute. It shattered against the stone patio, sparkling wine pooling at her expensive shoes. "The entirety of my estate, including all liquid assets, properties, and the controlling shares of Carmichael Hardware, are left to my granddaughter Chloe Carmichael," Wallace read, his eyes shining with triumph. "She possesses the work ethic, the compassion, and the integrity that this family was built upon." "No!" Victoria shrieked, losing all pretense of elegance. She lunged forward, her face twisted in rage. "That's a forgery! You planted that! You're a lying, manipulative little—" One of the sheriff's deputies stepped between us, holding up a hand. "Ma'am, step back. We are here to enforce an emergency court injunction freezing all estate assets. You are ordered to vacate these premises immediately." I looked at Bradley. He was staring at Victoria, as if she were a live grenade. The realization that the bank accounts, the sports cars, and the luxury lifestyle were entirely gone had just hit him. "Bradley, do something!" Victoria screamed, grabbing his arm. "Call Finch, call the police!" Bradley slowly peeled her fingers off his jacket sleeve. "Are you crazy? I'm not going down for elder abuse and fraud, Victoria. We're done." He turned on his heel and quickly walked away, disappearing into the crowd of whispering guests. "Bradley!" she wailed, her voice cracking. I walked up the steps, stopping inches from her. She looked utterly defeated, her expensive clothes suddenly looking like a clown costume. "You called me broke," I said quietly, so only she could hear. "You threw his medals in the trash. You tortured a dying man for a payout. Well, look at you now, Victoria. You have absolutely nothing. Now get off my property." It took the deputies 30 minutes to escort her off the estate. She left in a taxi, screaming profanities out the window. I stood on the porch, watching her go, feeling the weight of the last few years finally lift from my shoulders. I didn't bulldoze the old workshop. Instead, I restored it. I took over Carmichael Hardware, expanding our community outreach programs and ensuring Martha was taken care of for the rest of her life. Grandpa Teddy had given me a legacy, but more importantly, he had given me the strength to protect it. That's exactly how my greedy sister lost everything, and I reclaimed my grandfather's true legacy. Wealth doesn't define a family. Love, loyalty, and integrity do. Sometimes, the quietest people in the room have the strongest fight in them. If this story resonated with you, and you loved seeing justice served, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas. Let me know in the comments below if you would have ever forgiven a sister like Victoria, because honestly, I never will.